Hi, and welcome to another episode of BrandVertising with Don Norris. Today, we're going to talk about the CMO Council's recent study on basically what's the marketer today need in terms of their marketing communication agencies, from people that work for them, the pressure that's being put on today's chief marketing officer from their finance directors and their CEOs. We're going to talk about that. And there's a study that was done that was just released recently that sort of put on the list what I sort of call the marketer's to-do list. And if you just give me a second, I'll put my gogs on here and have a look at it. One of the first things that the study talked about was the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer today, really needs to connect the measurements of multiple channels that reach across social, digital, traditional media. So how do they cope with that? You know, years ago, we just had the traditional media, then digital world came along, and now social has just screamed into the world. You've got CMOs that are figuring out, how do I merge this all together? How do I deal with certain agencies that have certain skill sets? Even internally, some people are stronger in the traditional world versus the digital world, especially using generational gaps to factor that in. So that's one of the things that this study came out and talked about. The other thing was, how do they redefine the customer experience? Bridge that gap between the art of marketing and the science of marketing. Basically, how do we get some measurements? There was that old action that said 50% of your advertising is working, we just don't know which 50%. Now that's a sort of another world. You have CEOs and chief financial officers that need to know every dollar you're spending in marketing, what is it getting back? So as a chief marketing officer today, how do they measure that? From social media, which is grappling really hard to figure out how they can prove their worth, to traditional media, which has always, again, had that 50% issue, and, you know, digital world, which pretty much you can track what the spending's been doing. The third one has been this shift from business to consumer, from consumer to business, which basically means the consumer's now in control. They can decide who to engage with. When they're looking to buy, they go online, and they know so much more information about you before they walk into your store or operation. So your staff and everybody has to be ready to go. They can't assume the consumer is not engaged. They are engaged. That's changed the game of how you as a marketer need to deal with your customers. They're deciding who to engage with. It's not just you pushing out a message and hoping a few people click on. They're out there actively deciding who they want to engage with. So it's a huge change again to the marketer and how they engage with their agencies and they hire their people that work for them. And then the last of the sort of the to-do list that came out is, how do you pull out insights from this reams and reams of data that they're collecting online, whether it be from social media channels or databases that are working off of other channels they've got, and their traditional offline research that's tracking monthly users, daily users, brand U&A studies. There's so much data happening there. How do they pull from that real insights? And do they have the talent? And can they lean on their outside agencies to help them a lot more? And what does that mean for outside agencies as they position themselves to deal in this new marketing world? So when I read this study, I got to thinking about one of my first bosses, a guy named Tony Altilia. And Tony was a master and really an advocate of client-agency relationships. And back in 1985, I remember he wrote a speech and a document that he often presented to people about the role of the client and the agency relationship and how that's grown. So I thought about, why don't I get Tony on the show, and we'll talk about some of these realities that the chief marketing officers and marketers in general are facing, and compare that to maybe what's happened in the last 25 years and where it stands today. So today we're going to bring Tony on. We're going to talk about that. Tony is a guru in this area. When we come back from a little clip I'm going to show you now, we'll talk to Tony. What I want to do before we get into it is there's this clip, which some of you may have seen, that's sort of a funny take on the state of the advertising agency today, and as how it's shifted from the traditional billboard, TV, radio, print world to the role of online, digital, social media. So we're going to show you this clip, and when we come back, we're going to have Tony Altilia from Maxim Partners, Inc. On, and we'll talk to Tony about the state of the marketing client-agency relationship and the future of what the role of marketing communication companies needs to be. Back in a minute.
Throughout history, mighty empires have risen and fallen. The Mayans, the Romans, and in recent history, this empire. MP S&C Worldwide, an advertising agency, but not just any agency. This was the last advertising agency on earth. At one time, this was a vibrant, thriving organisation. But then one day, the people who worked here disappeared in an instant. Gone. This office has been preserved just as it was found after everyone vanished. We can even see what they were doing when that moment came. Filling in timesheets, getting another coffee, playing foosball. They were carrying on as they always had, ignorant of a great change going on all around them that would soon destroy them all. And this was it. The consumer, to whom agencies had force-fed their brand messages for decades, stopped being passive. This was the catastrophe. Because now the consumer could actually choose what they wanted to see, not what the advertising agency forced them to. But still, agencies like this felt invincible. So they ignored these changes and held fast to the things they knew, like this thing. And these things. And this. But most of all, they clung to this, the television commercial, even when clients begged for new, non-traditional ideas. So they simply repurposed their print ads into clever, rich media banners and glibly suggested that everyone have a Twitter feed. In agency after agency, the story was the same, until at last not a single advertising agency was left. So much was lost because of arrogance and ignorance, and because they chose to ignore the changes going on all around them. But in the end, the reasons don't matter. What matters is there were people once in this advertising agency, then one day, there weren't.
Well, that's just a fantastic piece that sort of sums up some of the points I was talking about. How is the agency world changing to meet this shift from business to consumer, from consumer to business? And it's leaving dead bodies all over the place in the last 5 years, especially the last 10 years. What I'd like to do now is bring on Tony Altilia. And Tony Altilia was, as I mentioned, was one of my first bosses, maybe actually my first boss when I got into the advertising world in the JWT company back in 1985. Tony is one of the managing and one of the general partners of Maxim Partners, Inc., a Toronto-based marketing branding consultancy. And Tony has been in the advertising marketing game for many years. He started as a brand manager for the Campbell Soup Company in Toronto, and then from there he got into the advertising agency business, and he worked in Toronto and Montreal and Chicago with JWT and Leo Burnett. He went to Chicago with Leo Burnett and took on global assignments running Reebok globally, and also took on the international heads for the McDonald's account out of Chicago. Then around 2000 he came back to Canada and he became the president of DDB. And Downtown Partners. And Downtown Partners was DDB's creative super shop, which is famous for amazing work such as the Bud Light Institute, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I'll hopefully show you a few clips of some of that great Budweiser work. And Downtown Partners was, for 6 years in a row, made the short list of Strategies Agency of the Year. So Tony and the agency were rocking. And then a few years ago, Tony retired and left DDB's world, and he started Maxim Partners, where he works with a variety of clients throughout Canada, from banks to other fast food companies, etc. If you go on MaximPartnersInc.com, you can see who they all are. And I'm really happy to have Tony on board because, as I said, as far as I'm concerned, there's no one who has a better understanding of the importance of a client-agency relationship and how that's evolved over the year and basically where it needs to be today. So, Tony, welcome to BrandVertising.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for those kind words. I hope I live up to the billing.
Oh, I'm sure you will, mate. Hey, so what do you think of that spot we just showed, which was actually sort of a spoof done Versace and Saatchi for the FitKit or FitC convention a few years ago?
Well, I think with any humor, there's an element of truth in it. I mean, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but there is an element of truth, and that's why it strikes a responsive chord with most of the people in the agency world, I think. I think that, it garners up a lot of points of discussion. And one of the things that I've done since I retired was I taught at OCAD. Had put in an Executive Masters of Advertising program, and it was for people that were in the industry, and it was a 2-year program. Part of the program was, and I taught one course. I taught brand development, but one of the things in the program was we got to travel around the world to visit the best agencies in the world. So in 2 years, we made 3 trips, and each trip we did, we visited 4 to 5 agencies. So went to San Francisco, we went to Brazil, we went to Amsterdam, we went to Berlin, we went to New York. And I think one of the striking things that we saw some of the finest agencies in the world that were renowned for some of the best work, was that things haven't really changed that much. You know, I got into the agency business in 1976, and I spent 33 years in it. And the world hasn't changed in terms of the agencies. They have in terms of, you know, some of the challenges that are outlined in that video, which is, you know, consumer is now in control. I believe the consumer was always in control. They decide to buy or not.
Right.
And they have now access to companies and can communicate with companies spontaneously. And to me, the internet and social media is just word of mouth on steroids. It's instantaneous, and brands can win or lose on how they respond to customers. But that was always the case. If you got a consumer letter and you didn't respond to it, then, you know, 2 friends tell 2 friends that tell 2 friends, and it's, you know, word of mouth. Bill Bernbach said, whose 100th birthday is this year or this week, word of mouth is the strongest form of advertising, and I think that the internet has done that. But the thing about the agency world is structurally they have not changed, a lot of them. You know, I mean, they talk about integration and the I word, but they still are siloed, a lot of them, and there's some that are not, but they're still siloed, and they still have departments. They still have account guys and creative teams and research people, and, well, not many, but planners.
Right.
So I think the world is, you know, things are changing, and I think that's the challenge for the agencies, is that can they change quickly enough to engage in this new social media, and the way fragmentation of how you communicate with consumers is exacerbated in, you know, the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, let's go through one of these points on their sort of to-do list, Tony, which was, how do they sort of connect the measurements from these various channels? And so if the agency world, and I agree with you, most of them still are structured like they were, even though they may put people in pods, but they're still sort of, you're the specialist of digital or social or traditional. And again, there are exceptions to this rule, but majority, I agree, still work that way. How do agencies or marketing services companies, whether it's a PR firm or an event agency or whatever, deal with the reality that now the chief marketing officers are saying, you know, I need help here. I need to be able to show my CFO that this stuff is working. I'm getting huge pressure on all this money that I'm spending. And on the digital world, I kind of can, because I can say I spend this much money on the internet, and I'm getting this many clicks, or I'm getting this many responses. But on some of the others, I can't. And how do I bring this all together? What do they do? What does an agency do with that reality?
I think the challenge is, and one of the things that I think has transpired is agencies relinquished a few things. They relinquished media, which was a great source of data. They relinquished researchers and replaced them with planners. And they do not invest. You know, when I first got in the agency world, we were the custodian of the consumer. So we did research. We owned research. Leo Burnett, Chicago, had 40 researchers and 10 planners when I left there. Agencies in Canada don't do that. And they don't do it because the multinationals are squeezing them for profit, and I understand that. And one of the few agencies that is doing it, and this isn't a plug because I don't have any affiliations to any agency, but there is I won't even say who it is. There is an agency in Toronto who when they started, and they're very successful, it's a Canadian agency that invested a lot of money in segmentation research. So when they pitch a business, they know they have proprietary research about a brand and a client. And if I was to start an agency today, I think the first, yes, you have to have the creative people. And ultimately, that's what you're selling. But it's got to be based on the consumer insight, and the insight's got to be based on fact. And agencies have been relegated to, I just lost picture. Agencies have been relegated to...
You okay here?
Yeah, okay. Agencies have been relegated to simply doing the creative, just coming up with the idea. Well, if the idea isn't based on insights and isn't based on research, then why is the client going to believe you? If it's an opinion, it doesn't hold the same weight as if it's based on fact, qualitative and quantitative information. And now you've got, as you said, you've got all these multiple sources of consumer data that didn't exist before. And I think the agencies have to invest in people that interpret that. The other thing is, we talked about, and this isn't dumping on agencies because I spent 33 years of my life there and I made a living, and a lot of my friends there, and I believe agencies will figure this out because they're full of smart people. However, they are fundamentally structured the same way, but so are clients. Clients aren't investing in people that really, some of the big ones are, but a lot of clients are getting all this data. They don't know what to do with it either. They're confused. There's so much coming at them.
Yeah.
They're having a hard time, sifting through it and saying, okay, what's the true insight? And it's a matter of investing in people and letting them go with it. And, smart people are the answers to a lot of problems, especially in the agency world where, your only product is your people.
Now, there was this, to that point, a little while ago, McKinsey came out with this, not that they're the first ones who did it, but I thought they did a really nice point on sort of the restructuring of media. And if you look at media from the perspective of that you pay for, which is what 33 years ago and the 23 years I spent in the agency game, the same thing. You go out and you pay a third party to place poster or radio, TV or whatever. There's that paid for media. And then there's a certain skill set that's required around that. But then you also have what's now owned as sort of owned media, which is the big shift that a lot of companies are still trying to grapple with. Is they now own the website, their own website. They may own a Facebook page or a Twitter page or whatever else, and they now own that, and it's theirs. And they then now I'm going to put content on that. And what am I going to say? And how do I think about that? And it changes as a marketer how you think about it, because traditionally you had third parties thinking about your content and where it's going to go. And now all of a sudden they got, wow, I've got all this own media, whether that be a retail outlet, banks inside. They got that's really their media that they owned, and they can actually help people. And then the third part was the earned media, which is how do I get people to, back to your word of mouth comment, how do I get these people to talk about me, pass me on, rank me in the top 10, I'm the place to go, I'm on Yelp, I'm wherever I am. But if you look at media from a paid for, owned, and earned section, you're a marketer going, well, boy, that's a very different kind of people I need to have in my marketing department. And how do I structure that? There can't just be the one person that was, because very few people out there, Tony, have this figured out that know enough about all of it to be a master of it. So it's just so new. And anybody who says I'm a social media guru, it's like, I'm going to wait a few years before I give you that title to see if that's true. So I just think, to your point about how marketers are dealing with it, and back to one of those CEO short lists, how do they bring this all together in the role of integration? And can an agency of any kind help them in that integration? What do you think?
I don't know. I think what's happened is because of fragmentation in the agencies, in the agency world, when I first got in the business, our agency was Ogilvy & Mather, and they did everything. They did pack design, they did sales promotion, they wrote our they helped do our sales annual sales meeting presentation, they did advertising, they did media, they did research. They were everything.
Right.
But they weren't great at everything.
Yeah.
So promotion companies came along and said, well, don't use your agencies. They're not a specialized agency. We'll do promotion. So now the point of contact for the marketing guy was not one person, it was two, now it's three, then it's four, now it's 5 or 6. So, and then that then puts the responsibility on the client to, who owns the brand and who's the champion of the brand, who's the custodian, who's the zealot. When I worked on Procter, they engaged us, and I still think they do with their agencies, they engaged us as partners in the brand. And in the old days of the budget meetings, which were a challenge in and of themselves, they were sort of inquisitions, and they don't do them anymore. But what that did is the agency, shoulder to shoulder with the brand group, defended what they were doing with the brand.
Right.
And so it was beyond any of your recommendations, whether it be creative or any other kind of marketing communications, was based on an intimate understanding of the business, and you were a partner in the business.
So where's the talent come from then in Canada today, Tony? So you're now you're running an agency, you're running a small agency, a local agency, whatever it is, a big agency. Where do you go to get people that are going to help this CMO with this list of, the 2011 study says, I need integration, and I need people who get that, and I have people that can help pull insights out of reams of data. I mean, that's the two key points that come out. Where do they go?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, my youngest son, I have 3 boys. My youngest one is 22. He just got accepted into a program at Humber, which is a university degree program from Guelph. It's a 4-year creative advertising program. 4 years. I mean, nobody does that in Canada. And they were I think they were one of the first to get it. And it's highly so. There are universities doing it. I think what when I was at Burnett, and this isn't patting ourselves on the shoulder. It was a matter of survival. When I was at Burnett, Toronto, we were challenged with exactly the same question, Don. Where do we get people? Because, an account guy would move or person, guy or girl, and, the client would say, look, we're trying, you guys can't have that hole empty. We're paying for it, and we need somebody to run our business. So, in 6 months, you try and find somebody, you use headhunters, and, you get desperate, and the first person that has a nice smile and shiny shoes, you go, well, he must be good. He looks good. And then 6 months later, you're firing him because he's useless. So what we did, and what I did it at Burnett, and I did it at VMB, and at Burnett, this was 25 years ago. One of those people is still at the agency and still one of their key account people. And we went out and we recruited on campus at the best business schools in Ontario, and we created a training program, specific training program. And so we bred our own, and that's what agencies have to do. Your clients are doing it. Procter's going on campus. Kellogg's is going on campus. All the big packaged goods companies are recruiting on campus. And this is the thing that I don't quite get about agencies. And I understand it, because if you're running a multinational in this country, which I did, you go to quarterly profit meetings in New York, and they beat the shit out of you. Excuse my language. Yeah. They beat you up for quarterly profits, which are unrealistic targets. And you go, well, I can invest in a university program. We said, we got to the point at Burnett, Toronto, where we said, we have to. We can afford not to, because one headhunter fee was 30% of their salary. We could spend half of that and get 3 or 4 really good candidates.
Exactly. But again, then you need people within the agency that are able to train and that are somewhat experts on digital and social. And given that those are still very growing areas, and there's very few, unless you're a big multinational agency, that you've got depth in all those areas.
Well, sorry, Don, to interrupt, but I think that you got to decide what you're going to be as an agency. Because if you think you're going to be an agency that can do all that stuff and be best of class in all of those things, you have to prove it to your client. And what clients are saying is, and this is where clients are saying, in the days when we went shoulder to shoulder with Procter and we were custodians of the brand, what clients are saying now are, no, you're the creative agency. You come up with the idea. We're the custodians of the brand. Yeah. We own the brand. You don't own the brand. We own the brand. Yeah. Which
comes back to the trouble that agencies have, as you mentioned before. And I think you've used the term, the agencies lost the seat at the adult table. They're just not taking credible from when ideas come. And what's the insight that's going to drive the business ahead versus what's just the ad idea or the creative execution. Right. Who's thinking about my business? And you guys, as a creative agency or an advertising agency, and there's agencies out there that do put business first. And they're maybe not the most creative agencies all the time, because they actually drive business, and clients go, listen, I don't care about winning awards and pencils. If you're actually driving my business, I don't really care. But that's always the balance, right, between the agency world. Are you guys overly creative and winning piles of awards, or are you actually growing my business? And the happy medium is you're doing both, of course. So,
right, they're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not. So the challenge becomes, how do I get those people trained, especially now knowing that on the marketing side, and I think we talked about this off air before, the marketers are challenged. They don't have a lot of talent either. And a lot of clients that I work with in Western Canada and that I worked with in the multinational world in Asia as well, the marketing departments are getting pretty thin. Their margins are getting tight, and they're trying to do more and more with less. So it's putting pressure everywhere on suppliers, on partners, on the actual CMO themselves. Is who's going to actually help pull this together? And that's why the life cycle of the CMO is not that long.
Well, exactly. But you see, here's where the big shift has taken place, in my opinion. 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the CMO was the president. They had an active and deep-seated interest in marketing. Most of the guys came up through marketing.
Yeah.
And now it gets relegated to a CMO whose average lifespan is 4 years or something.
Yeah, it's
so,
that. Yeah.
Why is that a surprise?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not marketing as a discipline because there is pressure on return on investment, return on involvement, and all that. The president is not actively engaged in marketing, to my the way they were.
No, but then there's this other argument that marketing really is, I mean, the definition of marketing is the whole entire organization puts the needs and wants of the drivers or what they build around. And many people say we're marketing driven, but when you test them on that, that's very rare that happens.
I've never seen it. I mean, even within, I worked 7 years on Procter, who I have great admiration for. Smart, my view on all this stuff, if I was a marketer, I'd watch what Procter does because they'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, Tony, sorry, I just wanted to move on because we're running a bit tight on time. I want to talk about one of the last things, and then before I want to show some of your classic agency work you did at Downtown Partners because we want to talk about that. But if you were an agency today, what would you do? How would you start an agency? I mean, say you decide, I'm going to get back. I'm going to stop. I'm going to open an agency again. Maxim Partners is shutting down, or I'm turning it into an agency. What would be the fundamental principles that you'd build it on? Again, knowing what the CMOs today are looking for out there in this term of integration and insights versus all this data that's pouring around.
Well, I think if you're going to do it right, I think you start with what do you think the clients want. And I would I would go out and I would target the 10 clients that I wanted, and I'd want no more than 10. And I'd talk to the president, CEO, what do you expect from a multinational or from a marketing service agency? And I would build it around that. And I think what it would build around would be, I want sales results, I want big ideas. And these are not new things. I want sales results, I want big ideas that move my business forward, and I want some sense of ownership on behalf of the agency. And if I was to start an agency today, I would invest first in two things: HR and research, and then attract the people that want to be part of that.
And what are you calling research, Tony?
Somebody who is the repository for anything that has to do with the target, right? I would have quantitative people and qualitative people. Great. And I would have them link. I would have them link up together like. Just thought of this, but you could have them link up together like an art director and a writer. I mean, It has to be information-based results. It can't just be. So many times and we talked about this before. So many times I was in meetings where, somebody's selling an idea and they say, "Well, everybody is shopping at Lululemon." Well, first of all, not everybody is shopping at Lululemon.
Right.
So you're an idiot because why should I believe you when you make a statement like that?
Yeah.
So automatically, Frank Palmer said, who I worked for 7 or 8 years, said, we're in the trust business. And that's what, I fundamentally believe with when we worked together was, why should clients believe us just because we tell them?
Yeah.
Right? They got to trust us.
Yeah.
And they're not going to trust us if we feed them, nonsense.
And that's pretty much what's happened with traditional media, right? They've been misled so often, and that's why the power's gone back to the consumer. The consumer's going, you know what? I'm not going to believe the 30-second commercial anymore, guys, because there's so many of you companies that have been bankrupt and been sued, and you'll say anything you want. I'm going to go out and find out from my friends what they think about it. Hence the power of social right now, and every study after study, the power of the TV commercial from trust compared to the word of mouth, which we've already talked about how powerful it is. The trust of the traditional role of advertising is shockingly going down. And that's another issue for another topic is how do you rebuild that trust? Tony, thanks for being on the show. I want to end with some of the great work you did and your agency did at Downtown Partners with the Bud Light Institute. As you know, I worked with Labatt and Molson for a good part of my career as well, so I have a soft spot for great beer advertising. But just to set them up, what made this work so powerful? And I was going back looking at it for the show. I mean, it still cuts through compared to 99% of the stuff I see today. What made it so powerful? And if you can, why did they walk away from that?
I think what it made it so powerful, and let me be perfectly clear, that this advertising was well on its way when I took over the agency. So my role in it was just to collect the accolades. And it was really they're just the creative guys, and it won at Cannes, and it made us the 15th most creative agency in the world, as judged by the Gun Report in 2005. But I think that the reason it worked was why every good advertising work is based on a human truth. And the human truth here is guys are, when they get in their 30s, and it wasn't advertising that was directed at 18-year-old beer drinkers, it was advertising that was directed at 20-something, late 20-something researchers, which are beer drinkers, which was, now for the first time in your life, you're saddled with responsibility. You can't just take off and go have a beer with your buddies. You got a mortgage, you got a job, you got all that responsibilities, and wouldn't it be nice just to go have a beer? And that was the insight, and it was, so it was based on a human truth, legitimate human truth, and it was brilliantly executed by some very talented comedic writers.
Great. Well, that's Tony, I'm going to show the history spot and the greeting card spot. When I asked you the other day, what would you like me to show? And those are what's good. I think, and they illustrate your point tremendously. But once again, Tony, thanks for being on BrandVertising. It was good to connect via the internet and social technologies today. And we'll talk soon, friend. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me. Good luck.
So let's have a look at these two commercials that Tony Altilia's agency, when he was at Downtown Partners, a DDB agency, did a few years ago. And just outstanding work. And if you haven't seen them before, you're going to be in for a treat. When we come back, we'll end up this episode.
The saga began in 1922 with the first successful Tea Party. Since then, the Bud Light Institute has continuously found ways to keep women occupied, so men could go out with their friends and maybe have a cold, refreshing Bud Light. In 1953, we invented the Tupperware Party, freeing up an entire afternoon for men to get together and play a round of golf. Inventions followed one after another throughout the century. The shoe sale, 1962. The soap opera, 1968. In 1971, we invented feminism. The Stagette, 1976. A Day at the Spa, 1984. Yes, from the invention of the telephone to 24-hour online shopping. We were there then, we're here now. And we'll be there for you tomorrow. We're the Bud Light Institute, and we love you.
This calls for a Bud Light.
New from the Bud Light Institute, a unique line of greeting cards that are perfect for any occasion. Like, I didn't want to wake you, so I stayed away all weekend. Let's make February 15th our Valentine's Day. I meant fat with a PH, like the kids say. And the ever-popular Happy Belated Anniversary. Remember, it's easier to beg forgiveness than to ask.